we're no longer in partnership with say, your people have to work 40 hours because we are paying you for a service. It's not fair to pay you for that service for 32 hours when we're paying other providers and they're working 40. And so my argument was, you're paying us for a service. We're delivering that service. We're meeting your KPIs. What does it matter how we're like, you don't care when we're making them work 50 and 60 hours to get it done. Like,
exactly.
You're not upset then. But it's a culture shift for society, right? It was a culture shift within our organization. But it's a risk too. So we are in contract with another one that did also implement that. And at first we just tried adding more employees because they would consider a 32-hour work week person 0.8 of an employee. I worked for a little bit and then it became financially unstable to do it that way. So we did have to move this one little group back to 40 hours because it's really important work and we didn't want to give up on it. But as soon as we did that, half the team quit, which proved our point.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. Now, I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation today because I have the president and CEO of Family Resources. More importantly, I have a leader who is innovating to serve her community by doing things differently. In today's conversation, we're going to talk about the Family Resources mission and impact. We're going to talk about cultivating an organizational culture of employee well-being. We're going to talk about the impacts that we're seeing in our community and society as a whole when it comes to social media and youth mental health. We're going to talk about leveraging efficiencies in the form of technology, innovation, AI, lots of those conversations. But we're also going to talk about how Nicole's doing some things differently. Now, Nicole, in our previous conversation, you mentioned something to me and said, if you stay in our organization long enough, you might just end up running the place. Why is that something that is so relative to you?
Well, because I've been here for almost 18 years. So I started as a therapist for sexual assault victims, and I quickly moved up the ladder, and the mission resonates with me, and I joke with people, if you just stay here long enough, they'll keep moving up and they'll put you in charge of the place.
I think it's really interesting and really important for us to kind of talk to the audience about why you were so inspired to go into this work. One of the conversations we talk about on the podcast today is that with all the things that we could be doing, like TikTok and being an influencer and YouTube and trying to do drop shipping and all the other quick, I would say, satisfaction, instant gratification business models people pursue, why did you choose to go into something that has such a big impact in the community and serving others?
Sure. Well, I have a really strong passion for helping others. So what drew me to Family Resources was initially the position. Obviously, I just gotten out of grad school and I wanted to be a therapist. But once I got here and started doing the work, when you work with victims of crime, it's not just about the individual sitting across from you in that crisis moment. It's also about all the systems that work with the victim, the community, how people respond to victims and survivors. And so it gave me an opportunity to take my skills beyond just that one-on-one therapeutic relationship to how I can interact with the entire community and have a ripple effect throughout the entire community. So I don't see myself ever leaving this profession because every day is different. I get to know lots of different people and work with lots of different people, lots of different systems in the community, but I know that we're not just changing lives one by one, we're changing our entire community's infrastructure so that everybody can live a healthy, happy, and safe life.
It's interesting to me that you are having such a profound impact by getting ahead of the problem. Now, in our previous conversation, you had mentioned to me that you guys have a problem in your community, or you had a problem with juvenile car theft, as an example. We also had a problem with gun violence. I want you to take a little bit of a deep dive into two of those problems and how you and your organization have partnered with other community leaders to be able to create a bigger impact and get ahead of these issues that we see kind of being prevailing across the United States.
Sure. So to take a deep dive, we have to step back a little bit. So Family Resources for many, many decades provided what we call foster group care services. And those are youth who are adjudicated through the juvenile court system or don't have a safe place to live. And what we knew in working with these youth over the years is they were typically here for a couple reasons. They had made some bad decisions, of course, and that was usually a result of the trauma that they had experienced in their lives. Trauma that was typically a result of violence, whether it was domestic violence, gang violence, witnessing homicides, just witnessing community violence, sexual abuse, child abuse, you name it. So there was a common thread there, which for our organization, we're unique because we offer such a wide array of services. We were able to use our survivor services expertise to try and address that underlying trauma of our youth. But some of the reasons they were getting involved or some of the reasons they were ending up in foster group care or the juvenile court system is they were stealing cars, they were shooting at people, right? So these were very finite points of violence that our youth were experiencing or perpetrating, again, because they were victims of abuse to begin with, made bad decisions, and so on and so forth. So it got to the point, and this was right before COVID, we took a step back and we said, okay, we have this poor service of our organization that takes up a lot of resources because a 24/7 operation with youth living with you, especially youth in these situations, requires a lot of resources, but it's at the end of the problem, right? Because we weren't at the time impacting the home environment that they would go back to. We would have the kids for about 6 months, and we would work with them and we would make progress, and then they would go home and we would see a 70-80% recidivism rate across the state of Iowa with kids coming right back into the system, right?
Wow.
So obviously that's not working. And, the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing you're doing and expect different results. But that's also the business structure of a lot of nonprofits is you get a contract and the contract tells you what to do and you deliver the service. So you're never really allowed the opportunity to research and develop a different way to do it. But we had a family, the Morency family, who came to us and wanted to invest in family resources and give us what they called a transformational donation. And what we did with that donation is we did research and development. We talked to the kids with lived experience. We talked to our system partners, our juvenile court, our law enforcement, our schools, all the people that were working with our kids and our kids themselves, and said, if we could do it different, what would we do? And we got a ton of feedback, a lot of results. We worked with a local university here, St. Ambrose University. We had a white paper, everything. And really the conclusion we came to is the earlier we get to kids and families and the simpler we make it, the better outcomes we have. And that wasn't shocking to any of us. If you heard these kids' stories, you could pinpoint, when they were 5, we could have done this. When they were 10, we could have done this. But we just didn't have that system in place. So we needed to refocus our resources, our people, our money, our talent on early identification and intervention. And so that's what we've been doing. So we've been very strategic and intentional about the services that we offer so they align with that early identification and intervention, so we don't get bogged down in putting all of our resources toward the end of the continuum and more towards the beginning. So all of that being said, from FY23 to FY24, juvenile car thefts in Scott County are down 30%, which is incredible.
Wow.
Our shots fired are down 26%. Our group gun incidents are down 54%, and the number of victims are down 59%. So we know this works. We know early identification intervention works, and we also know it works when you work alongside the people who are in the thick of it, who are either committing the violence or victims of the violence.
I just am so impressed with the curiosity in leadership that is involved in saying we have to get further downstream in order for us to stop, I would say, treating the symptom and really start treating the cause. I love talking about curiosity in this kind of realm of leadership. When you're making big shifts, you get a donation that is a transformational donation from a family that says, we believe if we give you these resources, you can do things differently. Was there any type of hesitancy from the organization or maybe even the mindset of leaders in saying, we've been doing this for a long time, we continue to have an impact that we see, but we're not having the impact that we want? Is it good for us to shift? Because I know that entire experiences of pivoting can be kind of scary from a leadership perspective. Did you experience any of that?
But yeah, I was early in my tenure as the president. I literally hadn't even served as the CEO for a year. This family came to me, and at first we thought we should create transitional housing for youth. That's what we thought we should do, and that's what I mean. Like, okay, transitional housing for youth is even further away from foster group care, right? That's like even after the fact. That's not really so. That's not transformational. That was the word the donor used. We want to give you a transformational gift. And we take stewarding our philanthropic resources very seriously. So if you want me to use your money for transformation, how do we really do that? So, and I pitched it to him like that. And I said, I don't know if it's going to work. I was really honest with them. I was really vulnerable. Again, I'm newly minted CEO, huge donor, huge opportunity. And they went for it. And we created a documentary about the process so that we could capture all of it so that other organizations could learn that it's okay to take risks. It's okay to say what we're doing isn't working and there's better ways to do it. And it helps us show other donors, think differently about how you're supporting organizations, think outside of the box. And that led us to making a decision to stop doing foster group care services. And that was probably the biggest and scariest decision that not only our leadership had to recommend, but that our board had to approve, because we were the agency on this side of the state that had the largest number of beds and had been doing it for over 60 years. So that was a huge decision, a huge risk.
How did you get everybody to buy into this big, audacious goal? Because when we talk about having an impact in our community, the statistics that you just listed off are transformational, not only to your community, but to the lives and people who are growing up in your community. So how do we kind of, as a leader, have the confidence in ourselves and our ideas to be able to say, we're going to pivot and we're going to say no to something that we've done forever. And we're going to say yes to uncertainty because of the belief that we have in the impact that we can make. What was that early experience like? And I want to say this because a lot of leaders find themselves in the place of that intuition, I guess you would say, of realizing we can do better. They're given an opportunity, but often we are scared to take the shot that can really make the biggest difference.
Yeah, I think having a research partner really helped. So part of what we used that money for was to contract with St. Ambrose University in their Masters of Public Health, because community violence and the services we offer are a part of our public health, right? So when we were able to show local data about what it was that we could do better and what our clientele were telling us, it really gave us those concrete talking points to help folks understand this isn't just about intuition. Yes, we all had that intuition, but this is what our community is telling us, and this is what we should listen to. And then when we took a look at whether or not we kept providing these other services, it came down to we are putting 99% of our resources into 1% of the clients that we're serving. What if we fled to that and we were putting our resources somewhere else and having a bigger impact on a larger number of people? And when you got down to the nuts and bolts of that, those were really staggering data points for our board and our community to consider when making that pivot. Now, to throw another thing on top of it, we made that pitch during COVID. So we started this research during COVID, and we finished it at the end of it. But, COVID was awful, but COVID also presented a lot of opportunities for organizations to change the way they were doing things. It kind of gave people permission to test things out and try things, that they hadn't tried before, because, you just had your whole world flipped upside down. So why not try something new at that point? So that was another factor that played into it.
I mean, I feel like that's so beautiful, taking advantage of an opportunity, right, where things are in flux, to say, hey, we're going to not, I would say, retract ourselves and hide from this moment, but we're going to lean in and let's see if we can not only make promises, but we can back it up with facts and proof. And that's what you guys have been able to do, which is so transformational. I mean, that's so cool to hear the risk paid off, but it's backed by the data through the partnership that you have. And now you're talking about the impact in the community. It's so amazing. And this is where I love hosting the podcast, because Hart and Hustle is all about the intersection of the heart of doing things that are right with the hustle that's involved to make big changes. And you are a perfect example of somebody who demonstrates that, not only in the impact of your organization, but the impact in the community. One of the topics of our discussion today is going to be about kind of your organizational culture. So one of the things that I think is amazing that you talked about in our previous conversation was, at one point in time, you said, you know what, we're going to start focusing on working towards a 32-hour work week, and we're going to make this work. This is a bold move, especially when you're serving the community and having such an impact. Let's talk about that initiative, how it came up and why it's so important, and how you kind of executed on it.
Yeah, so it's interesting given the conversation we just had, because when I first became president, we started talking about it, but then COVID happened, and we all, I would spend hours a week driving to meetings, but now we all have become so much more efficient with, having meetings on Zoom, having meetings on Teams. So COVID naturally taught our workforce that you can make it work in a hybrid situation at home, that you can be more efficient with your time and using technology. So it kind of laid the foundation for saying we've already learned how to work more efficiently. We could carve off time, in our work week to give back to our employees. So that was the underlying, that had already happened. And the workforce crisis, I don't know if you experienced it in your neck of the woods geographically, but we were just desperate for people to work. We could not attract and retain. We're a nonprofit, and we've worked really hard to get our pay structure up to a thriving wage. But it was just really hard to attract and retain, and the jobs are hard. Our burnout level is really high. So we had already placed a lot of emphasis on wellness. We had created a wellness program with a local partner called Healing Heart Center, where our employees get 5 sessions with that organization, and it could be massage, Reiki, actual therapy, chiropractic services, whatever they want, free for the employees and part-time employees on top of their EIP. We had given plenty of PTO. We had given 5 self-care days. We had done everything we could from a benefits standpoint. And then we just started really trying to poke holes in. We had a group that got together that represented all areas of the agency. And we tried poking holes in why a 32-hour work week couldn't work. So we were trying to be pessimistic. But what we did is we created a template and, internal rules to go by to make it work. And so July 7th, because it had to coincide with the first payroll of the fiscal year, we did it. We launched it. Leading up until that date, for about, I'd say, 4 or 5 months, we started practicing our internal rules, you can't schedule meetings on Mondays or Fridays because those are the days you have to pick from. You can't send non-emergent emails after noon on Fridays or before noon on Mondays. Just these little tweaks. We started practicing those, so we were ready to go live on that July date. And so we have finished a whole year of being in a 32-hour work week. And now that is part of our culture. We've had the best employee satisfaction survey results we've ever had. I just learned that because we just had to get quotes for our health benefits, and we are down in all areas, all claims. Like our workforce is healthier and happier. So it just proves that when people have a balanced life, I don't care what you do with those 8 hours. You can sit on your couch and watch Netflix if that's what you need to do. But, when you give that time back, people are happier and healthier. And when we consider new services or new contracts, if it's not going to fit into that 32-hour work week, we're going to be really hesitant on whether or not we should do it.
Nicole, let's freaking go. You know what I mean? Like, you are literally a transformational leader because you are leading from the front and you are willing to test. This is a conversation that we see so much of these days, where people often talk about not just a 32-hour work week, but a 4-day work week, right? And when I think about that, this is going to be an interesting conversation. There's a lot of distrust that often leaders place on their employees. Now, I host another podcast called the HR Heroes Podcast, and I talk to leaders of people and culture. And one of the biggest transitions and problems that we saw in leadership coming out of the pandemic and trying to push people back into the office environment was, how do I know they're getting the work done? How can we trust them? And this is living proof right in front of us. So everybody who's tuning in, listening, and watching to this today, Nicole has led her organization to a 32-hour work week. They implemented the values and their practice internal principles to manage work. You establish principles, establish standards, and now your team is executing on not only the work, but they are happier and they are healthier at the same time.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
It's saving us money. Our insurance costs are going to go down. The other thing, I understand why people are hesitant to do it, but if you put a framework together of important metrics that you need to keep an eye on, if your employees are hitting those metrics, then trust them. If they're not, then manage them. Empower them, coach them, whatever you need to do, but you can do it if you want to do it. That's the thing. You have to want to do it. You have to have buy-in. But if you don't, and if people don't think it's going to work from the get-go, then it's probably not going to work.
I know one of the conversations that we had previously was, naturally, when I think of a 32-hour work week, people are going to say, there's no way we're going to keep the lights on. So you guys implemented this. Obviously, as I'm sitting with you today, the lights are still on. You guys are still executing on the vision and the mission. But one thing that's also really interesting is I know that you had to deal with some times of adversity and some conflict from some of your vendors, right? Or people who said, we're not going to support people working like that. Can we talk about how you navigated that and what type of problems you came across?
Yeah. So we did. We had two funders. One we're no longer in partnership with say, your people have to work 40 hours because we are paying you for a service. It's not fair to pay you for that service for 32 hours when we're paying other providers and they're working 40. And so my argument was, you're paying us for a service. We're delivering that service. We're meeting your KPIs. What does it matter how we're, you don't care when we're making them work 50 and 60 hours to get it done.
Exactly.
You're not upset then. But it's a culture shift for society, right? It was a culture shift within our organization. But it's a risk too. So we are in contract with another one that did also implement that. And at first we just tried adding more employees. Because they would consider a 32-hour work week person 0.8 of an employee. And that worked for a little bit, and then it became financially unstable to do it that way. So we did have to move this one little group back to 40 hours because it's really important work, and we didn't want to give up on it. But as soon as we did that, half the team quit, which proved our point. So, 90% of our agency is still in that 32-hour work week. We're still making it work. But because of those two situations, when we look at making a decision on new services, we need to know it fits in with our mission, our culture, our values. And part of that is this work-life balance and that 32-hour work week. So, yeah.
I mean, this is just so impactful to me because one of the things that I think about, especially when we're having such a fundamental data-backed improvement and impact in our community, is the only thing that should be the focus is how do we keep this going for as long as we possibly can? And this is where that element of curiosity from a leadership perspective says, are we doing this the best way? Can we listen to different perspectives? Can we test? Can we do things differently to be able to meet the needs of how we're serving individuals? And this is what I love is if we're going to future-proof our businesses, we have to put on that thinking cap of curiosity and innovation to be able to meet the needs. And you guys are proving that you can do it. I want to talk a little bit about how you guys are viewing technology as an example, to be an accelerator, to help you do more with less, not only from a resources perspective, but more with less time. Because I think what you mentioned a little bit earlier, when we trust our employees, we put them in positions to win and be proficient and efficient, they're going to get the work done. So how are we kind of thinking about technology as that enabler to help our team do more with less?
Yeah. So, I mean, you and I are an example of that right now. Like I didn't have to travel to get in your studio, right? So, having meetings, even though our offices are, we have one in Bowling, Illinois, we have one in Muscatine, Iowa. We're not making people travel, right? We're getting on our computers. We're still as efficient. We're having those meetings. So, just that piece of technology, which everybody learned to use, right, during COVID is a big part of it. The other thing that I know I've talked to you about is part of my role is I write a lot of grants, and I mean we write a lot of things, period, whether they're grants or policies, et cetera. And I use ChatGPT to help me with that. It's not like it's writing it for me, but I can get my thoughts together, put in a paragraph, and then help me make it more refined, right? So I'm cutting down on hours of really long mental strains to figure out how to say this just the right way so that they'll give me money by asking AI to help me with it. And I don't even think we've really, I don't think we have yet figured out how to use AI as much as we probably could in our industry. I think it's scary for some folks. Our work is with people, so it's never going to replace that rapport you have with a client. But for the administrative side of things in a nonprofit, it absolutely can help us with that.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about, once again, using the view of an accelerator, not a replacement. Okay. One of the things that I have learned in talking to hundreds of leaders of different types of businesses is when it comes to topics like burnout often comes from our teams when they feel like they're doing repetitive tasks, doing things like answering frequently asked questions, playing phone tag, and doing things that really don't have a perceived, I would say, agency on the mission that we're on. And so if we can think about the partnership in the future between a technology like artificial intelligence and us to put the human back in the human seat so we can do the personal connection, the one-on-one conversations, and show up so people can be felt, heard, seen, validated, that is a beautiful harmony between technology and the human services that we're leveraging. And I think that is a mindset that our leaders need to get a little bit more behind, because often when a new technology pops up, I mean, I feel like it was just in the early 2000s when people were saying that the internet was going to be the end of the world, or that we were always going to have the phones on the wall. I mean, there's so many ways in which we push things forward. Why do you think so many leaders are scared of technology? Where do you think that comes from?
I don't know if they're scared of technology. I think they're scared of change. And I remember people thinking that the world was going to end, Y2K. But I also remember arguing as a young supervisor, actually as a young director, with my president at the time that we needed a Facebook account. Like, imagine a nonprofit not having a Facebook account, right? But at the time, it was how do we keep it confidential? How do we make sure that people aren't saying mean things about us? It was more of how do we manage it? And that is something you have to take into consideration. How do we manage it? Like, we have a TikTok account. That's not the average nonprofit doesn't have a TikTok account, but we had to figure out who's going to manage it. It takes time, right? So I think people get nervous around technology when they don't understand it, they don't know how to manage it, and then they don't know how to implement that change management. Or because, I have young children, they're going to be more technologically savvy than me, but that's okay. I just think as leaders, if we dig our heels in and we think that this is going to be a passing phase, we're just sticking our heads in the sand. It's not. We've seen technology just burst over these last, 30, 40 years. It's just going to keep advancing. It's not going to slow down. So we have to speed up sometimes.
And we have to leverage that, I'm going to use the word again, but that honed sense of curiosity. It really is a soft skill that our leaders have to lean a little bit more into, because yes, you're right. Did we think that we needed a Facebook page back in the day? When you came from a day when you had yellow pages, maybe you didn't think you needed a Facebook page. But now, in order for people to be able to find you, experience your mission, see the impact that you're doing, you have to be in the channels that they are in. Often people say, if you're not on TikTok, if you're not on Instagram, if you're not on LinkedIn, as an example, you don't exist, because I'm not going to come across you in this everyday world where we work remotely and we don't get the exposure as much as we should. And so I congratulate you for leaning into the element of saying, let's stand up that TikTok account. Let's figure out how we're going to manage it, because it is really, really impactful. I want to talk about social media a little bit in this part of the conversation. Now, one of the things that we recognize is that social media has always been something of the scapegoat for the problems that we see in society. And I think it's very easy for us to be able to point a finger in judgment and say that is bad or that is good. What are some of the challenges that you perceive when it comes to youth mental health, as an example, for the use of social media? What are you seeing, and what's your intuition telling you?
Yeah, so I think social media, like anything, can be used for good and it can be used for bad. Youth are going to engage with social media no matter what. I have a 12-year-old daughter. She does not have a cell phone, but by God, she has access to social media because we have iPads at home. We have computers at home, right? So even though I'm the mom that doesn't let her 7th grader have a cell phone yet, she's still going to have access to that stuff. And it's not a bad thing as long as it's managed, as long as it's in moderation. And in fact, sometimes I think we have to lean in, like you're saying, to using social media, because that's the language, that's the platform that our youth are using to help them understand mental health better. There's lots of organizations out there that do a great job of using social media to help educate kids on their mental health. I know at our school district, we've got, the cards that they can just snap their phones on if they need to call someone or if they need to text someone because they're having a rough day. We have to make it easy and efficient because these kids have grown up with it. They need that instant ability to connect. Where I see it being a negative thing sometimes is if you spend all of your time only interacting on social media with other humans, you're really not interacting with humans. You're interacting with a device, and that can be really isolating. And kids, the way we know their brains form, if they have too much of that screen time, that is affecting the formation of their brains, the physical development of their brains. Excuse me. So we have to limit that in order for them to grow up and have, their brains develop in a good, healthy way. But we also have to teach them how to interact with people in person. So it's really easy to be a bully online, right? Because you're not seeing the person sitting across from you and how they're reacting. But when we teach our kids how to interact, I just did this last night with my son and my husband because they were having an argument, and I wanted my son, my 6-year-old son, to tell my 46-year-old husband his feelings. And he's like, "Oh, Mom, I'm not going to do that." I'm like, "No, you are. Because I'm going to raise a son who knows how to talk about his feelings." And that's what we need to do. Because otherwise, you're both yelling at each other. You're not making any headway. You both are mad. You both are saying you're hurting each other's feelings, but you're not talking about why. So that's where I think social media can be a negative, because while they think they're interacting, while they think they're having that connection, it's not truly a human-to-human connection. And that is important.
Well, I love the stance of enabling your son with the skills that he is going to need to be able to be a functioning, I would say, effective human. Because if we don't have the skill set of being able to express ourselves emotionally, we're going to run into some problems. And I love that you're leaning into that. But the other side of that is choosing not to give your daughter a mobile device is also another amazing, I would say, decision. I want to share a little study with you that might surprise you. The average 18-year-old today spends about 9 hours per day on their device, screen time, if you will. Now, if you really want to be scared, there's a tool out there called Lifetime Screen Time Calculator. You go to this website, you put in your current age and your average screen time. If I'm 18 and I spend 9 hours of my day on my device, and I put in how much time am I going to spend over the rest of my life, 24 years of your life will be spent behind a screen. Now, when I think about limiting the exposure to all of the elements of life, interacting with different people, making memories, one thing I always talk about is as I get a little bit older, I feel like life is going by faster and faster. Yes. And when you compound the element of distraction, where you're in a doom scroll for what you're supposed to be for 10 minutes, but that turns into 2 hours, all those 2 hours add up to a lot of time lost in life. And so I think we need to stand up and have that contrarian ideal in our family to say, let's spend time with each other. Let's spend time learning how to express ourselves, because those are the skill sets that you're going to carry into life. Social media could be gone in a decade, and we're going to be missing out on a lot of time. And so I congratulate you for that. I think it's absolutely amazing.
That statistic is frightening, so much so. And the other piece of that I think is really scary is that's 9 hours of serotonin levels being high, right?
Yes.
And that's addictive. So serotonin is what makes us happy. If folks don't know that, it's the chemical that your body produces when you're happy. And the kids' brains are learning that these devices give them that quick hit of serotonin. And if we're not teaching them how to get that quick hit of serotonin sitting across from another human, they're always going to gravitate towards that screen instead of that human interaction. So, that's just a very, biological way of thinking about how social media and screens, again, I'm not saying kids shouldn't have them, but how do you limit them? How do you do it in moderation? And also teach them, interacting with other humans and adults and developing all of those social skills that they need to survive in life.
I totally agree. And when I'm a big observer, so when I go out into the world, I go to the gym, I go to the store, I go to different places, I'm always looking at the behavior of different people. And what I recognize is that no matter what generation you're a part of today, one of the things that we become incredibly good at doing is leveraging the skill set of escapism. So there's a book out there called Indistractable, which I think you would really enjoy. It's a story about how a dad had a pivotal experience with his daughter where they were doing a daddy-daughter experience where they were like, what's your favorite superpower? When she answered that question for the first time, he got an email on his phone and he was answering the email. And then she said, Daddy, what would your superpower be? And he said, wait, what? And she said, well, I told you what mine was. And in that moment, he had the gravity of the world hit him because he said, I missed the first time that my daughter was going to tell me what her superpower would be. And I recognize that this little device has an amazing ability to keep us coming back to it. But what he also talks about is the skill set of emotional regulation. Whenever you're in public, like I was talking about, the store, at the grocery store, at the gym, wherever you're at, you see people on their device. Often they're not even looking at anything. They're just looking at their device, flipping through the screen back and forth. What that is a result of is the behavior that we've anchored in. Anytime I'm uncomfortable, I'm going to then go to my device to get that release of dopamine and serotonin to escape this moment. There's a really interesting term called alone together. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but when you go to a restaurant, you see everybody in a group setting. We're all on their device. Everybody is alone, but together. And unless we have conversations like this, we can't call attention to that behavior because we've been tricked through time and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of interactions with our device, that this is a safe place. Yeah. But that safe place keeps us from experiencing everything that life is about. So I get really fired up when we kind of have these type of conversations.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know my husband and I notice that all the time when we're out. We're like, look at that couple. They're both on their phones. I wonder how that conversation is going. And it's an interesting conversation to have with people. I have friends that do that, and I don't want to shame them for being on their phones, but I also I want to talk to you. I don't want to have to interrupt you being on your phone to sit with you and be with you and be present. So it's going to continue to be a challenge, I think, especially given we have generations that are literally growing up with a phone attached to them. You know, I didn't have a cell phone until I was a senior in college. So when my daughter asked me what type of YouTube I watched when I was her age, I just laughed. I'm like, that wasn't a thing. So, yeah. So, you know, given that I didn't grow up like that, but I'm trying to parent kids who are growing up like that, or I'm seeing, you know, other young adults who have always had one, it's a hard conversation to have sometimes.
It is. And we see other examples of, I've been to, because I'm here in Las Vegas where my studio's at, there's a lot of shows and a lot of entertainers who come to this city. Kevin Hart was a big entertainer who came here recently. And one of the things that we experienced was when you went into his show, they gave you a bag that you had to put your phone in. So you could have your phone on you, but your phone was then crimped in this bag and you couldn't open it. So everybody comes into the auditorium, everybody sits down, and instead of everybody sitting on their device, what do? They start conversations with the people to the left, in front of them, to the right, behind them. And it's amazing to see how we're all secretly yearning for that connection that we don't get in our social lives and our personal lives. And I think we just need to eliminate a distraction every once in a while to get back to that place that we know is so fulfilling. And I feel like we could eliminate a lot of the challenges that we see in our macro society if we weren't always distracted or kind of being influenced by something that wasn't innate to us, if that makes sense.
100%. No, it totally makes sense.
So let's kind of close or land the plane here with talking about what is the future of family resources. Now, we've made some amazing progress backed by data, talking about the impact that we're having in our community. You've implemented a 32-hour work week. The lights are still on. You're still having an impact. You're hitting your KPIs. What are we doing in the future? What are you looking for?
So we have set a big, hairy, audacious goal to reduce violence by 50% in 10 years. We don't have that quite pinpointed into how we're going to measure that. We're working with St. Ambrose University on that, but those statistics that I talked about earlier, shots fired, victims, and, you know, juvenile car thefts, those are some key data points that we're looking at. So that is a big goal, and over 10 years, I think the way we do that will probably shift because we're going to continue to listen to our community and what they're telling us they need. So no matter what happens, Family Resources will continue to be an organization that is embedded in our community, is working with our partners. We don't do this alone. We are in great partnership with our schools, our law enforcement, our judicial system, our hospital systems, you name it. We're all one big team. But we're going to keep listening to what the community tells us and what the data is telling us, you know, the local data. I hope that we, right now, one of our strategic goals is to be the nonprofit employer of choice. So we have some very concrete goals around, you know, how we want to keep increasing pay. But I hope in 10 years that we can say we are the employer of choice, regardless of whether you're a for-profit or nonprofit, because you want to come work at Family Resources, not just because of the pay, but because of the mission, because of the culture, because you feel like you're making a difference. And that's what, you know, you want in your life. So that's what I'd hope our future has in store for us.
A worthy, big, hairy, audacious goal. When you're having the impact that you guys are having, you're backing with data. It's not making promises, but it's coming through and using proof to prove that you're doing what you say you're going to do. And that is what it's all about. One of the traditions that we have here on the podcast is we love for our previous guests to ask you a question. Now, this person had a question for you, and I know you're going to really be able to hit this on the head, and it kind of hits on all the things that we talked about a little earlier. What are the internal mechanisms that you utilize to stay on course with your beliefs?
Internal, like me personally, or me, or like the organization?
You personally.
Oh, man. Well, my kids are definitely, that's not an internal mechanism, but the way they react to me is definitely a mechanism that helps me stay on course, whether or not they're like, Mom, you're not paying attention to us, or Mom, I need more of your attention. But I'm really into wellness, so I pay attention to what my body says to me. I think I shared with you that I found out that on April 17th, I found out I had a benign tumor, in my neck and at the base of my skull. So that was a really scary moment, but it was also a moment where I knew something was wrong and I was listening to my body, and my doctor and I helped figure it out. And had we not, I probably would have ended up with really, really bad vision. I have slight double vision right now, and that was the indicator that got us to look into it. But listening to my body, making sure that I'm taking care of myself physically and mentally. So if I can't pay attention to my kids, then I know I am not, doing things that I need to do in order to have space in my life to give them what they need. So I have to figure out where I need to take better care of myself in a mental capacity and a physical capacity.
Well, Nicole, I just want to say, for all the work that you've been doing for 18 years now at Family Services, how you continue to innovate, push your organization forward, but also future-proof for the future leaders who want to come and be a part of your amazing mission. I just want to say, for everybody who's watching and listening, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. That's a wrap. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.